On September 29, 1913, a steamship named Dresden was en route from Antwerp, Belgium to Harwich, England. One of the ship's passengers, Rudolf Diesel, the man later credited as the inventor of his eponymous engine, inexplicably disappeared. On October 10th, a sailor aboard the Belgian steamer North Sea caught the view of a body floating in the ocean. It was later realized that the body was in fact Rudolf Diesel. Despite a mounting deal of speculation surrounding his disappearance, his death was judged officially as a suicide. At the time of his death, he was on his way to England to meet with the British Navy in regards to the installation of his new engine as a suitable power plant on their submarines. Subsequently, conspiracy theories surfaced almost immediately, and news headlines read, "Inventor thrown into the sea to stop sale of patents to British government." Another even read, "Murdered by agents from big oil trusts." However, the likelihood of Diesel throwing himself off to Dresden was high. As it turns out, he was nearly broke, but the uncertainty surrounding his death may never be solved. Before his death, Diesel patented his engine design on February 28, 1892, and the following year, he explained his revolutionary design in a paper called Theory and Construction of a Rational Heat Engine to replace the steam engine and contemporary combustion engine. During that time, steam engines drove the industrial era, powering the factories, mills, trains, and ships, but were unnecessarily large, inefficient, and laborious to use. Rudolf recognized this and knew the steam engine was primed for a replacement. The initial inspiration for Diesel's engine came from pneumatic cigar lighters that had existed at the time. Pneumatic cigar lighters utilized a disc that was pressed into a closed glass tube. When the user repeatedly compresses the lever, the air trapped in the glass tube would become hot enough to ignite the wick attached to the disc. This phenomenon is easily observed in a bicycle pump. The body of the air pump becomes noticeably hot as the pump is repeatedly compressed. The air inside the pump is essentially heated by the generated pressure, which is the fundamental principle that Diesel's engine design is founded on. His new engine was known as the compression ignition engine, which could burn almost any fuel. Early prototypes ran on vegetable or peanut oil and required no ignition system, a stark contrast to the conventional combustion engines of the time. The actual ignition happened when fuel was introduced into a cylinder full of air that had been compressed to extremely high pressures. Let's further explore the basic principles of how a diesel engine works and its notable differences between a gasoline engine. Much like a petrol or gasoline engine, the diesel engine operates on the same four-stroke thermodynamic cycle. A thermodynamic cycle is a sequence of actions that involve the transfer of heat into and out of a contained system, and the changing pressure, temperature, and other variables that eventually return the system to its initial state. The sequence of actions that will be our primary consideration is the intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust cycles, with an emphasis on the compression and combustion cycles. A gasoline and diesel engine starts their thermodynamic cycle when air is introduced through the intake port when the intake valve opens. This happens while the piston begins the intake stroke. When the intake valve closes and the piston is brought upward, the atomized fuel and air mixture is then compressed. At this point, the notable differences begin to surface. The spark plug on the gasoline engine fires off. As for the diesel engine, the air and fuel mixture reaches its self-ignition temperature as a result of the rising piston. Self-ignition is the lowest temperature at which an air-fuel mixture spontaneously ignites without a source of ignition, but entirely by compression. At this moment, combustion takes place, driving the piston downward in both engines. The exhaust valve then opens, and burnt gas is forced out by the rising piston. Air and fuel are brought in again and the cycle is repeated. It's this compression that allows the air and fuel to ignite in a diesel engine without a spark from a spark plug. This is also the reason why diesel engines have higher compression ratios compared to gasoline engines, which don't compress the air and fuel mixture to the point of self-ignition. A compression ratio is the ratio of the maximum to minimum volume in a cylinder. For example, a 10:1 ratio means that when the piston is at bottom dead center, there is 10 times more volume in a cylinder than when the piston is at top dead center. As a real-world example of compression ratios, a 2015 Volkswagen Golf TSI has a compression ratio of 9.6 to 1, whereas a 2015 Volkswagen Golf TDI has a compression ratio of 16.2 to 1. The higher compression ratio ensures that the air and fuel mixture is compressed enough to the point of self-ignition. On the other hand, a gasoline engine utilizes a lower compression ratio, and ignition happens by virtue of a spark plug firing. The advantages of the diesel engine eclipse those of a gasoline engine in a few regards. A diesel engine has higher thermal efficiency because of the self-ignition that happens when igniting with high compression. Contrast this to a gasoline engine with a lower compression ratio that needs a spark to ignite the air-fuel mixture. Additionally, diesel engines are able to produce more torque at lower RPMs because of the longer stroke, higher compression ratios, and typically higher turbo boost pressure. The return is less fuel required to move a vehicle. This is the reason why diesel engines are the application of choice for the commercial, railroad, and watercraft industry. Consequently, the diesel engine's turning point was its development for submarines. As conflict was on the horizon in 1913, European nations were striving on how to perfect submersible propulsion technology. At the time, steam engines seemed impractical to power submarines. The internal combustion engine seemed the best solution. However, early examples of gasoline-powered submarines, specifically those of the British Navy, suffered from ignition problems as a result of the volatility of their fuel. Early gasoline-powered submarines were prone to fire because the gasoline engines powering them would consistently leak flammable fuel and fumes. In order to act as an alert, the British Navy kept caged white mice on board. If the mice became overly excited by gas fumes, then the vessel's crew would shut the engines down. While the Royal Navy were using gasoline, the French and Germans were experimenting with diesel-powered submarines. Unlike the gasoline-powered subs, diesel was not prone to fire, and even more advantageous was the range it offered relative to the amount of fuel it required to run. The next crowning achievement for Rudolf Diesel's engine came in the early 1930s, with the introduction of the first commercially available diesel car. The Citroën Rosalie had a seismic impact on the story of diesel-powered road transportation. What made the diesel engine in the Citroën Rosalie exceptional was the Comet swirl chamber that the Rosalie's diesel engine used. The Comet swirl chamber is a form of indirect injection that utilizes a spherical-shaped pre-chamber that's connected to the main combustion chamber by a small passage. During compression, the spherical shape causes the air inside it to swirl, causing a better fuel and air mixture, which improves combustion. Essentially, this swirl design shared the denser, less volatile diesel fuel into two efficient atomized air and fuel vortices. This allowed the ideal combustion in a compact engine without compromising the power of the diesel engine. In 1936, the power of the Comet swirl chamber was solidified when Britain's George Aston broke the world land speed record in a Comet swirl-powered car by attaining 106 miles per hour. The advent of the Citroën Rosalie set the tone for future iterations of diesel-powered road cars. If you like this video and enjoy this type of content, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments section if you favor the gasoline engine or the diesel engine and why.